You know that feeling when someone asks, "Did you see the game last night?" And you feel this weird combination of blankness and mild guilt, like you've been caught not caring about something you were apparently supposed to care about? You almost rehearse an excuse. "I've been busy. I don't really follow sports." As if not caring about 22 people chasing a ball is something that needs an apology. And here's the thing. Somewhere underneath that awkward pause is a real question. Not, "Why don't you care?" but something bigger. Why does everyone else seem to care so much? How is it that an entire stadium of strangers can be emotionally gutted by the outcome of a game involving people they've never met, who will never know their names, playing in a city they might not even live in anymore? Because here's what nobody tells you. The gap between sports fans and non-fans isn't really about sports at all. It's about how different brains are wired to find meaning, belonging, and reward. And once you understand what's actually going on in both groups, you'll never look at either one the same way again. Hey, I'm Martin. And if you've ever felt quietly confused by your own indifference to something the world seems to treat as sacred, stick around. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We go deep on stuff like this every week. So let's start with what's actually happening inside the brain of someone who does care. Because most people's explanation for sports fandom stops at they just love the game. And that's like saying people love slot machines because they enjoy pressing buttons. Watch a diehard fan during a match sometime. Really watch them. The tension in their shoulders before a big play. The involuntary flinch when their team misses. The almost childlike joy when they score. That's not enthusiasm, that's neurochemistry. The brain is releasing dopamine, the same anticipation chemical that fires before you open a birthday present, before a first date, before anything uncertain that could go either way. And the key word there is uncertain, because dopamine doesn't just respond to rewards, it responds to the possibility of rewards. fMRI studies have shown that watching your team play activates the same reward circuitry as gambling. Not because fans are reckless, but because the uncertainty is the whole point. It's intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward schedule known to behavioral psychology. The same principle that makes slot machines engineered nightmares also makes a close fourth quarter genuinely impossible to look away from. But here's where it gets really interesting. For people who don't follow sports, that dopamine trigger simply doesn't fire. Research from the University of Chicago suggests that variations in dopamine receptor genes can actually predict how much someone cares about competitive spectator activities. Think about what that actually means for a second. Your complete indifference to whether a team wins or loses might be partially encoded in your DNA. You're not failing to appreciate something. Your brain is just calibrated differently. And then there's the tribal layer, which goes even deeper. Humans evolved in small groups where belonging to a tribe wasn't a preference, it was survival. Your group protected you, fed you, kept you alive. That hardwiring didn't disappear. It just found new outlets. Sports teams are, neurologically speaking, modern tribes with better merchandise. When a fan's team wins, their brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone that fires when you feel close to your family. Their nervous system is literally treating these athletes like kin. That's why fans say we won, not they. It's not a grammatical error. It's the brain accurately reporting what it experienced. Psychologists call this burging, basking in reflected glory. When things go well, you absorb the win as your own. When things go badly, you suddenly say they lost. Notice that pronoun shift. It's not inconsistency. It's the ego protecting itself. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People who don't follow sports tend to do this far less. Their self-concept is more stable, less dependent on external outcomes they can't control, which sounds like a compliment, and in some ways it is. But it also means they're missing out on something real, the visceral chemical experience of collective identity. This is the part most people miss entirely. Sports fandom isn't just entertainment. A 2019 study found that people with high sports engagement showed significantly stronger in-group bonding and community attachment. That tribalism, for all its irrational edges, is also what makes people feel genuinely connected to something larger than themselves. Your brain isn't broken for not needing that, but their brain isn't broken for needing it desperately either. So where does that empathy go in people who don't follow sports? Because research suggests non-fans aren't lower in empathy. They're just routing it differently. A 2021 study found that people with low sports interest scored significantly higher on openness to experience and appreciation for art and beauty. They're getting their emotional highs somewhere else, through music, ideas, relationships, creative work, nature. The reward circuitry is the same. The source material is just completely different. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who studied optimal experience for decades, found that flow states, those deep moments of total absorption, can be achieved through almost any activity. For some people, it's a Sunday game. For others, it's a book, a studio, a long conversation, a research problem that won't let go. And here's where it gets a little more personal. For some people, not caring about sports isn't just neutral, it's active. It's a response. Maybe they were excluded from sports culture growing up. The locker rooms, the teams, the unspoken hierarchy. Maybe the competitiveness felt aggressive in a way that didn't fit who they were. Maybe they grew up in a house where sport was the emotional language of people who couldn't say what they actually felt, and they quietly decided to find a different language. Your indifference might have a whole history behind it, and that's not something to fix. That's something to understand. But here's where most people go completely wrong when they try to bridge the gap between these two groups. They try to convert each other. The fan drags the non-fan to a game and says, just give it a chance. The non-fan tries to logic the fan out of their grief after a playoff loss, pointing out calmly that it's just a game. Neither works, and here's why. You can't argue someone out of a dopamine response. Trying to out-logic a tribal grief reaction is like arguing with a fire alarm. Your body doesn't care that you know it's not a real fire. The nervous system doesn't negotiate. What actually helps isn't conversion, it's translation. Understanding that when a fan is devastated after a loss, they're not being irrational. They just experienced what their nervous system processed as a genuine social rejection. Their tribe lost. Their oxytocin bonded them to an outcome, and that outcome failed. That's not drama. That's neurobiology. And for the fan trying to understand the non-fan, they're not cold. They're not missing a personality chip. They're just finding the same things you're looking for, meaning connection, belonging, transcendence, through a completely different door. Dan Siegel, the neuropsychiatrist who spent his career studying how minds connect, talks about how human beings are fundamentally meaning-making creatures. We need narrative. We need stakes. We need to feel like something matters. Sports offer one answer to that need. Unpredictable, communal, visceral, alive. Everything else in life is another answer. The novel, the project, the relationship, the cause. So here's the reframe I want to leave you with. And it's not a tip, and it's not a summary. It's something worth sitting with. The question was never really, why don't you care about sports? The question underneath the question is, what are you actually looking for? Meaning connection, the feeling that you belong to something real, that what you do matters, that you're part of a story that's still unfolding. You're not outside that search. You never were. You're just running a different version of it. And most people spend their entire lives watching the game, or refusing to, without ever realizing that the game was never really the point.